Lieutenant Commander Lou Conter, USS Arizona survivor, and family arriving.
This is Lieutenant Commander Lou Conter in December 2019, returning to Pearl Harbor, the place that in a single moment would change his life forever.
Hoo-yah, sir! Hoo-yah! Hoo-yah!
1924年、米国が日本移民の入国を禁止して以来、我々は今日という日の来るのを待っていた。米国人は白人種の優秀性を説いていたが、今度はどちらが優秀民族であるかを知らしめてやる。つける。眠っているものを見て攻撃を開始。我が国の皇軍は100中100発。ペンシルベニア、メリーランド、ウェストバージニア、カリフォルニアなどはついに海底の木図と起用。万歳万歳。
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. With the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God.
I signed up when I was 18 and went to San Diego, 3 months boot camp, and then was assigned to USS Arizona. At that time, it was up in Long Beach Harbor.
Lou Conter is a rare occurrence among a group of individuals that gets rarer every day. He is a Pearl Harbor survivor and also a survivor of the devastating explosion aboard USS Arizona that killed 1,177 men, roughly half of the entire casualties of the attack on Pearl Harbor. This is his story in his words, illustrated with historical film and photographs from the National Archives.
Well, I was born in Wisconsin, but raised in from 31 on outside of Denver, Colorado.
Okay. Lou had a neighbor who had been in the Navy since 1935. He came home on leave in 1939 and had to report to the recruiting station to re-enlist.
So our neighbor's brother had signed up for the Navy in 35. He went aboard. He was aboard in Nevada. He came home on leave, and so I didn't have to go work till 3:30. And he says, "Come on down with me while I sign up again." He said, "You guys haven't got anything to do," so we went down with him in the morning.
Lou tagged along with his friend to the recruiting center.
And naturally, the recruiters grabbed us to take our exam. And they said, "Don't worry, it's an 8 to 9 month waiting list to get in boot camp." And so I said, "You have plenty of time." So we took the exam, passed and everything. And about 2 weeks later, Mother came up to me and said, "Are you in trouble with us?" And I said, "No, why?" He said, "Well, there's somebody on the phone. It's about 10 after 8 in the morning. And they said they want Louis Anthony Conter." So I got dressed and went downstairs because we only had one phone down in the dining room in those days. Answered the phone. It's this the Navy Department. It said, "You took the exam a couple of weeks ago," and passed it, and said, "We've got a draft going out at 5:45 tonight. We have 6 vacancies. They couldn't pass a medical exam."
Because 6 recruits were sent home, a space opened for Lou. His Navy journey was underway.
So said, "We need 6 more to fill up." So I went down and talked to them. They said, "You're going for 4 years. Leave at 5:45 tonight for San Diego." So I signed up. I called my mother, called my girlfriend, called my dad at work, and I said, "I'm leaving at 5:45 for San Diego boot camp." "Okay." Mother didn't like it well, but Dad didn't care. He said, "It's good for you." So anyway, I left at 5:45 that night, and that's my first train ride from Denver to San Diego. I went to boot camp in 3 months. When we got out of 3 months of boot camp, well, I went to up in the bus with the rest of Long Beach to go aboard the Nevada and the Arizona, and about 4 of us going aboard Arizona. We went aboard the ship. We had our hammock and we had our sea bag inside of it wrapped up and on our shoulder. Chief took us down to Division 2 and he said, "There's your hooks and there's the hammock netting." And he said, "There's your locker, so put your stuff away and put your sea bag in the hammock netting there, and I'll see you on deck in 20 minutes." So that's where I started. When you first go aboard, for the first 90 days, you're generally put in the mess cooking to get that out of your system. So I was in 2nd Division, but I was mess cooking and setting up the tables and peeling potatoes and everything else for the first 3 months, and you have to set them up 3 times a day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I got out of that in 3 months and started, and I'd lay up on the hammock day and read for Seaman First Class because I wanted to get Seaman First Class. That was $54 a month. In Arizona, we had 14-inch guns there. I went into the 2nd Division, the lower handling room. We had the 105-pound bags of powder, 4 of them in each gun, you know. So we shot a turret. We had 12 bags of powder going out at 100 pounds each. That's why that thing. My job, we had to lift those out of there and put them on a conveyor to take them up to the breaches.
In mid-1940, the fleet was relocated to Pearl Harbor. For most sailors, this was an exotic tropical island paradise.
And that's when they decided to keep the fleet in Pearl Harbor and not bring them back to Long Beach. And so all of the families and everything were moved.
Before long, Lou would meet a girl and settle into a routine.
And I met a girl out there that I danced with. I was only 19. I met her father and mother, and I got acquainted with it, and her mother and father took me in like a son. And I had a bedroom upstairs in their house there. Hester was her name, Hester Hitchcock, and her father was a graduate of Cornell Engineering. He was vice president of Honolulu Dredging and Hawaiian Construction Corporation, which had a lot of contracts with the Navy in Pearl Harbor and dredging and everything. In September of '41, there was a friend of mine on the football team in Arizona, B.J. Johnson. He said, "Lou, let's go to flight school." So by that time, I'd made 3rd-class quartermaster. And just before I had 4 years in the Navy and 3rd-class quartermaster. Well, I was at Hester's dinner one night and then walked Admiral Calhoun, who was commander of base force. And he was the one that had contracts with Harvey and his civilian crews. And so we sat there and talked and everything. And Admiral Calhoun said, "Well, Lou, what do you do? Are you going to school here?" And I said, "Admiral, no, I got to tell you, I'm a quartermaster 3rd class on the Arizona." And he said, "Oh, well, that's fine." And so we got acquainted.
Lou talked to Admiral Calhoun about his plans. Admiral Calhoun was supportive and encouraged Lou to apply. Eventually, Lou was able to get his request in, and he took his first flight off Turret 3 of USS Arizona.
And my first airplane was a catapult off the 3rd turret. And we went up 5,000 feet and came around, and the plane made a big turn and put the boom out there, and we landed in the ocean and taxied up on the rope ramp. And I had to stand up in the back seat, and Ray will turn around and grab your belt and hold you while you grab the hook and hook it up, and they set you back on Turret 3. That was my first airplane ride. That was quite when you went off of that catapult.
Lou passed the first requirement for flight school. His executive officer signed off on his request, and he was given orders to report to Pensacola in November.
So we had a year and 10 months here before Pearl Harbor hit to plan and do everything else, you know. We did a tremendous amount of training, thank God, because that's where everybody was in good shape and did everything they had to do when that plane hit. Boy.
Lou had to go to sea one more time before transferring.
We went to sea on the 26th of November, and we came back, and we weren't supposed to come in until the 8th, Monday afternoon, after the other half of the fleet went out. Cause all of the fleet always half of it was out and half of it was in for security purposes. Well, we got orders from Washington, D.C. to get back into port on Friday, which was wrong. And I was a quartermaster then. I watched and I steered the plane into port and back. And Admiral Kidd told Captain Valkenburg at that time, he said, we should not be going into port. It's too dangerous to have everybody in there. That was a Friday, and they had a meeting aboard the ship on Saturday. And of course, you know what happened Sunday morning? The raid hit, and the ship blew up, and we lost Admiral Kidd and Captain Valkenburg and 1,177 men that morning, and 15 minutes, less than 15 minutes when it blew up. But anyway, Johnny got off. He was in 5th Division on deck, and I was in quarterdeck. In port, our quarterdeck is on the deck by turret 3, between turret 3 and the main. We have a little office in there. And Commander Fuqua was our first lieutenant. He came out from below, and he was bomb hit by number 4 with the turret, and knocked him out for a minute. He came to, took charge, did a beautiful job. He knew what he was doing. He was an academy graduate, something like 1932 or 31 or something like that, 28 years.
Commander Fuqua would be awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions in the coming moments. A bomb made from a naval artillery 16-inch armor-piercing shell would strike the USS Arizona on the starboard side, just forward of turret 1, igniting the powder magazine, killing hundreds instantly, and hundreds more over the next few hours.
Everything was a fire from the Marines forward, and there were guys coming out of the fire, burned pretty bad. They were on fire, they'd come out, they'd want to jump over the side. Well, everything was burning, they'd have been burned to death, so Commander Fuqua said, lay them down on deck till we can get them into a lifeboat to go to the hospital. We got about 15 or 16 laid down on deck, and we were there about 35, 40 minutes, and Commander Fuqua said, abandoned ship, it's too dangerous, we're not getting any out, and it's burning, everybody coming out. It's gonna come off your hands when you pick them up and lay. A vessel was outboard of us, and she got cut away, and Don Grattan went to the forward. He was a boatswain mate, 3rd class. And he went forward and cut the lines from the vessel to the Arizona forward and back, and it blew up. When it blew up, he came back in the fire, and he was a quartermaster at 3rd, but he'd only been on there about a year with us. I know Don was a good friend of mine. And we had a lot of experienced men, and in those days when you were 18, you were a man. So anyway, we got them out and got them to the hospital, and we fought the fire for 2 days till Tuesday. Some of the guys in the motor launches, we had 50-foot motor launches over the gig, the admiral's gig and the captain's gig, and we'd go over here and grab the hose, and they'd go underneath the fire because the fire boats couldn't get close enough to the fire so much, but the Liberty boats could go in underneath of it. So Tuesday, the fire went down, and everybody just went to base force and collapsed because it was so tired. And they let the fire cool down for about 5 or 6 days. I forget how many days exactly, but 5 or 6 days. And then 15 or 16 of us went over on the ship, and we had brought shallow water helmets and pumps, and where was our senior diver aboard the ship? He was 1st class water tender, and he was fullback on our football team too, but he was 6'2" and 240 pounds, He was our diver, and he put on his suit and went down, and he was down for 3 or 4 hours in the stern part of the ship, the officers' decks and the enlisted quarters there, and we were trying to see if anybody was alive. And the shallow water helmets, we'd go down, put a helmet on, never been on one in our life, but you go down and the guys were pumping air to you all the time. You used to stay down 30, 40 minutes. And it got pretty bad. We were catching air hoses on the hatches and everything. Commander Fuller said it was too dangerous, so we called it off. Commander Geisman was our executive officer. Made him captain, 4-striper instead of 3-striper. And he was in Honolulu as provost marshal. And, you know, so he called us in, and I went on patrol with him in a Jeep. We had a 30 caliber machine gun in the back of the Jeep, and we carried a 45 on our waist. And we put out the word that nobody was to be on the streets after sunset or before sunrise, or they get shot. And that order was in until May of 1945, and nobody questioned it. Civilians, they just did it because they knew we meant what we said we do.
Right.
And Captain Geisman was our boss. He was the provost marshal. So about the 6th of January was the first time we got any time off at all. Harvey came out, he was in Pearl Harbor, and he had his men out there helping fight the fires and get the ships and everything else. I made a point to see him so I could call my mother in Denver, because I knew she was going to get a letter or dispatch. And so he said, sure. So I couldn't call. They wouldn't let us do anything. So he called. It got to Denver, and she and Dad jumped on the phone and got the call. It was Saturday. And I said, I want to let you know I'm okay. And I said, I'm okay. I can only talk for a few seconds. I'll write to you, so don't worry about it. The headlines are Arizona sunk, everybody killed. Right. So I talked to her for less than 30 seconds on his phone. Christmas time, I went over to the hospital to see Lightfoot, who was a friend of ours, and Lauren Bruner. And Lightfoot died 3 days later, but Lauren didn't. Lauren lived until the last week in July. And the doctor said, okay, you're ready to go back to work. And so they pulled him out of the hospital and put him on a destroyer. He was a fire patrolman 3rd class. And he was on that destroyer through every war in the Pacific and came back to the States in January 1946.
Fate would make sure that Lou would get to flight school.
When I went over to Hester that night, in walked Admiral Calhoun. And the first time he'd taken off and been over there, and Harvey asked him to come over to dinner. And Harvey didn't know I was coming over. So anyway, when I walked in, he said, geez, I thought I sent you to flight school. And I told him what happened. We lost the orders and burned up, and Johnny and I, and Johnny was on his destroyer, and I was base force, and waiting to go out of somewhere in a 3rd class quartermaster, you know, on a ship, but all the battleships were sunk. He pulled me out of base force, and he pulled Johnny off the destroyer.
Lou was sent back to the mainland for flight school.
So my older sister was at Loretta Heights, and she said, I said, I'm going to be a nun. And I said, oh, you are? I said, well, you're going to war, and you'll be shot at, and so somebody's got to pray for you. 50 years, 60 years later, when she was at Nary, my wife and I went to see her, and Val said, Mary, you did a great job. He's still here. Henry's heck was still here.
In 1942, he got his wings.
November the 15th, 42, we both got our wings, first of our class.
He would be fighting the war in the Pacific from the air.
Anyway, we got our wings, and I went to San Diego, Coronado, and VP-11 PBYs. Because they'd been at Kaneohe and lost 12 planes. And then they got new planes. They said, we're going to hold you for 3 weeks. We're painting all the planes black. You're going to be blacked out. You're going to be flying all night long. They ordered us from then in February of 43 to Perth, Australia, to the Southern Command down there. And they'd drawn a line from Port Moresby across the Guadalcanal and said, no Japanese south of this line, period. We had 3 PBY squadrons down there that kept the Japanese north of that line.
Lou's squadron was tasked with rescuing Americans who had escaped from Leyte and Manila.
And so we flew up by Timor and landed at 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning in the Ocean Sea and met a submarine and gassed up and flew on in and made contact and picked up 15 women and children and back to Exmouth Gulf. And we were supposed to land gas out the submarine on the way back. There was no submarine for us. So after 23.5 hours of flying, we ran out of gas just was coming in. And the boat towed us in, filled us up with gas, and we flew from Exmouth Gulf down to Perth and dropped all the people off.
Lou flew out of Port Moresby from April 1943 on, operating closely with coast watchers who had made contact with indigenous people who had previously never been in contact with Westerners.
Which were like our SEALs today. We're working northern New Guinea, New Britain, all behind the lines up there, made friends with because the tribes were up there were cannibalistic and they ate you if they got a hold of you with no knowledge. So they'd send back dead off. It was all the Morse code then, those days of their transmitters, positions of Japanese ships, and we'd know if we had definitely ships to go after, we'd have a torpedo and 2 bombs. If not, we'd take 2,000s and 2 500s. And then in the waist hatches, we carried 14 parachute flares, which are 250,000 candle power, you know. And after we dropped our bombs in there, we'd go over every 20 minutes and throw out a couple of parachute flares and get out of the way. And they couldn't see us, but we'd keep the guys on the ground awake all night long. And you do that for a couple of weeks, they don't have any sleep while they're decided. Anyway, so we did that, and third week of September of 43, we were heading up the coast of New Guinea, and night at 5:30, and we got a shot through the waist hatch and hit one of those flares, and the flares exploded. We were only 900 feet. We were fired from the main gunner's chambers, you know, from the navigator's chambers aft. And so we had everybody come forward and close the hatch, and we had Gordon Kennington is the one you got there. Gordon Carrington was the PPC, and I was in the right-hand seat, and we landed in open sea. We were about 7 miles off. But we had to get out immediately because we had a 2,000 and a full load of gas.
Lou and his crew evacuated the aircraft quickly, worried about bombs and ammunition cooking off.
The 50 calibers were shooting out.
He kept his crew together, offering encouragement and survival knowledge. A member of his crew had given up hope and began infecting the entire crew with feelings of hopelessness.
Don't panic. I said, bullshit. Just sit down. I said, remember, we're in the charge. We can do something. We can tread water. We can do something. I said, get in the line and hold hands. And the guy next to you gets a little weak, hold him up on each side. But don't tread fast or anything. Just tread water as slow as you can, just to keep floating and knotting. And if a shark comes up, hit it in the nose of your fist as hard as heck because it'll swim away. And so I did that a couple of times, and they believed me then, you know. Anyway, we stayed there for about 40 minutes in the water, and one of the PBYs, our skipper from Sawdust, he was over there 5 or 6 miles going up the other side in New Britain Island, because we were going to go up through Cape Gloucester. And he came over and circled, and it was about 50 feet off the water, so we had no lifeboats, so they threw one of their lifeboats out to us. So we got into the jungle in New Guinea about 2:33 in the morning, hid them in the jungle, and told them, don't even fart. So I didn't want the Japanese to find us.
Lou and his crew were hiding in the jungle for 2 days.
And the next night, we heard a boat, that's a PT boat coming after us. A couple hundred feet from that PT boat, and I looked up there and they had those guns pointed right at us.
Lou identified himself.
So the guy on deck said, that's Conter. And so we went aboard.
Lou gave the names and positions of his crewmates. An underwater demolition team was sent to retrieve them.
So they went in and they were back in 45 minutes for all 7 of them. And we got aboard, and as soon as we got aboard that PT boat, it turned its tail, and those twins, we were doing 45 miles an hour in about 2 seconds. We got in the next morning, debriefed, got breakfast, stayed around that day, and we got up next morning, had breakfast, and the next night at 5:30, we took another PBY out for 13.5 hours dive bombing. That was the last third week in September, and then we went on through October, and what we do, we have the San Pablo and the Half Moon, that's tenders there. They had 3 buoys here and 3 buoys up here, you know, 3 or 4 miles away. And So there'd be 6 planes, and the other 6 planes would be back there. And we'd go out for 2 or 3 weeks, and then go back there for a week, while they were up here,
Right.
And so in November was the Battle of Rabaul, and here's New Britain Island, here's Cape Gloucester over here in WWII, and the month of November of '43, we flew like 18 out of the first 20 days in November all night long.
He was sent back to the States due to a heart murmur in early 1944.
I got in a Jeep carrier. There were 4 or 5 of us pilots on a Jeep carrier going back to San Diego from Brisbane.
Mm-hmm.
17 days. The skipper called us after we got out right out to sea, and we had 4 or 5 planes, F-4Us and ADs on there.
The captain told the group that should they be attacked, the injured and sick pilots would be pressed into service as fighter pilots.
So we went up, got in those planes and sat in the cockpits and played with the stick and looked around and got where airspeed was and everything else. So that if anything happened, we got to San Diego in 17 days. Never had to fly him.
He would spend the next few months under medical supervision.
And I said, there's nothing wrong with me, I want to go back to flying now. Well, I was there about all month of the rest of January and part of February. And then they said, we're sending all you guys up to Rancho Santa Fe to rest for 30 days. Because they had houses up there, Rancho Santa Fe, but they had a doctor and 2 or 3 nurses there to take care of the guys and cook and everything. And he'd go up there and just walk around the beach and have a ball.
But Lou didn't think he deserved to be there.
So my roommate was a lieutenant, first lieutenant in the Marine Corps, who had landed in Tarawa. And he had 13 hits in him with bullets. And he was every 2 or 3 weeks getting a shell piece taken out of him. He rated that. I didn't have any. Anyway, they brought a heart doctor down from Seattle. And I went down to La Jolla, the hospital that day, and he gave me an exam, and he said he could go back to flying. And this was in last of April, 1st of May. Anyway, I was transferred up to Whidbey Island, Washington, and I had met a girl at the beach down there, Catherine Loftus, and she wanted to get married, so we got married June the 10th in Los Angeles, in Cathedral in Beverly Hills.
Lou and his new bride were stationed near Seattle for just 60 days when he was given a new assignment.
And we got orders to go to Washington, D.C.
He was tasked with training Soviet pilots on the PBY.
We took a couple of hops around the bay there, and then they said, take him to Kodiak, Alaska, and get him over to the Russians. And we turned those over to the Russians in 24 hours. And they took 4 of us out of there, and they sent us to Jacksonville, Florida, and said, we just got F-7Fs in, which are the first night fighters from the Navy for carriers. They said, you guys are qualified night flying.
During this training, the Japanese surrendered and the war came to a close.
And I was made commanding officer of TDD Unit Number 1, Lake City, Florida, which was target drones. And so right after that, the war was over, and they didn't need the drones, so they pulled us out, and I was transferred to Orange County to the blimp hangars down there. Well, they had a lot of military equipment there they didn't need. They were going to start selling the Jeeps and everything, so I was down there for 4 months. Oh, it was awful. But I got to fly.